Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at the WILLGOO Xbox One style controller for the Nintendo Switch. And for this review I'm going to be trying out a new format. I know some of you guys just want to know if this controller is worth the $30 price tag and just want a basic rundown of any noticeable problems. So that's what the first half of this video will cover. For those of you who actually care about things like button travel, joystick dead zone, D-pad diagonals, and etc., feel free to stick around for the whole video. Alright, so the packaging is pretty bare bones, no logos or text, but it does give us a good look at the controller. On the back we see the specs. It can offer up to 5 hours of battery life, and while it does offer gyro controls and dual motor rumble, just like with many other third-party controllers, it will not offer true HD rumble, nor will it work with NFC. And also it can't be used to wake your Switch from sleep mode. Taking a look inside the box, we get our first look at the controller. And one glance at the plastic and it looks fairly plain. I don't know if the camera's picking this up, but the plastic just looks really generic. I can't say if it's the plastic they used or the finish, but it definitely looks like a budget third-party controller. As for the feel, despite the cheap look, it actually feels really solid and very lightweight too. While the shell may look fairly bland, I really love the Super Famicom colored buttons, and the joystick plastic feels really nice too. But the joysticks do feel a little bit loose and not quite as precise as the ones on the Joy-Cons. But they're taller, so they allow for wider motion. Getting the controller paired with your Switch is very easy. Simply go to the controller reorder screen and hold down Home and Y for about 5 seconds. Once it's paired, if you ever need to use the controller again, simply press and hold the home button for a few seconds and it should automatically reconnect. In my testing, I didn't have any noticeable lag, the buttons feel pretty responsive, and I'm really loving this D-pad. It's much better than the Switch Pro controller's D-pad. The WILLGOO's controller's D-pad feels much more consistent. I just wish it was a little bit clickier. But it still works perfect for puzzle games. I found Tetris borderline unplayable in the Pro controller, but this controller beats it at less than half the price. The analog sticks are pretty good for the price, but they're just not as surprisingly good as the D-pad. I was able to play the beginning of Warframe with them just fine, but they just felt a tiny bit off. We'll have to dig deeper into that in the second half of this review, but for now I'd say unless you're playing some competitive shooter games, you should be able to compensate for this by just adjusting the in-game sensitivity. Now on to the action buttons. They're really nice and clicky, but a bit more raised than on your standard controller, so they may feel a bit different. But they're still extremely responsive and pretty comfortable to use. So, all things considered, I think this is a pretty good deal for $30. It's definitely one of the better built third-party controllers I've seen in the last few years. Sure, it may not stack up to the Switch Pro controller in every area, but it still works really well for the price. If you want a full-size controller for your Switch and don't mind the more generic look, then I say go ahead and just pick one up. There'll be a link in the description. I've already covered everything I like and dislike about this controller, but if you're more interested in the technical details, feel free to stick around. First, let's talk about button travel. As previously mentioned, the buttons are a bit raised compared to most modern controllers. With a real Xbox One controller, the buttons push almost all the way into the shell, while the buttons on this still stick out a bit. The button travel is just a bit longer compared to a standard Xbox One controller, but the extra height combined with the longer travel will make the buttons feel a bit off. I think they make up for this with the nice clickiness of the buttons. They're very tactile and responsive. Moving on to the D-pad. It's very good for the price but can still be improved. I tested the diagonal inputs by alternating quickly between the opposite sides, and I got nearly 0 diagonal inputs. This actually feels pretty good too. The closest thing I can compare it to is a 3DS D-pad, but it feels a little bit more raised and slightly less clicky. So while it does feel pretty good and it is accurate, it feels a bit less tactile, so I'm not sure I'd use it for fighting games, but it'll still be a pretty decent option. As previously mentioned, the joysticks are pretty good, but not great. I think they should be fine for most people, but if you're playing somebody that needs precision, they may not be the best option for you. I decided to do some dead zone testing. Starting with the left stick, it feels about 10 to 15% of the center is not being registered, and the sticks register as full at around 90% of the stick's maximum movement. The right stick seems to be a little worse, with closer to 20% dead zone, and it seems to max out much sooner, like around 80%. You'd be hard pressed to notice this in most games as they tend to have a standard camera speed, but it would make precision shooters a bit more difficult. As for the remaining buttons, L and R seem nice and clicky, they're just a little bit loose. They're easy to press and accurate, they just feel a little odd. The LZ and RZ triggers feel much tighter, and surprisingly, they're actually analog. You may only have to pull the trigger about halfway for it to register at full range, so shooters may feel a bit odd, but it does mean faster firing, so it doesn't really bother me. Lag testing is kinda difficult, but as far as I can see this controller is pretty fast, only about 3 to 4 frames of lag at 60 FPS. So yeah, there's some things that could be touched up, but I still think this is a really good controller for the price. Again, if you want to pick one up, there'll be a link in the description. Special thanks to the manufacturer for providing this model for review, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.